it is impossible for a left project of equal and effective freedom domestically to succeed without an anti-imperialist agenda globally. What happens over there always has effects on what happens here. And I think Palestine has become a kind of powerful symbolic metaphor for that. Now, there are three reasons why Palestine and the question of Palestinian self-determination has become so central. And one of the central global dynamics of the 20th century was the shift from a world marked by European empire and imperial rivalry to a world marked by decolonization and independent nation states. But one of the things that distinguishes Palestinians is that going back to the 1940s, even before decolonization, you had established as a legal requirement the idea that Palestine would have an independent state. You're talking about a legal commitment to a particular community having an independent nation state and the failure to actually provide that. So incomplete decolonization. And that has a kind of cultural resonance. The second thing about it is that that incomplete decolonization is very much connected to the foreign policy commitments of the world's global hegemon. You cannot avoid, if you're in the United States, the centrality of the American state in replicating forms of colonial hierarchy that the US, as part of establishing a post-World War II liberal international order, was on record committed to overcoming. And so it requires us confronting our own sort of implicated nature as participants in a global hegemon, yet at the same time, engaged in the perpetuation of forms of colonialism that precede even the construction of the post-war international order. And then that ties to a third thing, which is all of this, especially in a very specific historical moment, which is we saw the return of a vibrant racial justice movement in the US, movement for Black lives, after the Iraq War, after the war in Afghanistan, in a context in which it was impossible to talk about American power without talking about empire. And so it meant that almost inevitably, the way to think about racial justice was to see it as something that was inherently global, that connected what might be occurring in Ferguson to events that are taking place internationally, including in the West Bank or in Gaza. And it requires appreciating that this is the time where effectively the only way you can operate as a cohesive popular front is to take the communities that have been most disfavored and marginalized, the voices that have been cast out, and recognize that that has to be at the center of any kind of political response, because to do otherwise is to essentially replicate precisely the conditions that brought us to this moment.